Hola chicos! Today we're going to talk a little bit about the concept of the subjunctive. We're not going to talk about the formation. This is el subjuntivo en el presente, en Introducción del concepto. Mi mamá no quiere que yo juegue. So, ¿qué es el subjuntivo? The subjunctive is used in the dependent clause of a sentence, typically after the K. You might be thinking, what the heck is that? Well, that basically means that a subjunctive structure cannot stand on its own. It needs an independent or trigger phrase in order to be used. A typical trigger phrase would be es importante que, or me alegra que, or dudamos que, any of those that elicit a K and a second verb. The subjunctive is needed sometimes after the K with that second verb. It is used when you're expressing influence over someone else, like an indirect command. So if you're trying to get your brother to clean your room, the clean your room part would be in the subjunctive. It's used with emotional reactions. So if you're really excited that your cousin's coming to see you this weekend, the fact that your cousin is coming to see you this weekend would be used with the subjunctive. It's used when expressing doubt, uncertainty, or denial. Your trigger phrases would be I doubt that, or I am uncertain that, or I deny that, but then your subjunctive verb would be in the dependent clause with that second verb. And the subjunctive is also used when speaking of an imaginary person or concept. So when, say, we're placing a personal ad, and we want to talk about what our ideal boyfriend or girlfriend would be, you would use the subjunctive to discuss all of their qualities if you needed a verb. So I have some ejemplos here. For expressing influence, es necesario que mis padres me den dinero para homecoming. Okay, so I've put K in a color because I want you to look at the K in these examples as the word that divides the sentence between independent clause and dependent clause. In the independent clause, you have the verb es, and in the dependent clause, you have the verb in red, which is the subjunctive verb. Den. It's necessary that my parents give me money for homecoming. You are expressing influence over your parents. For emotions, me preocupa que María no comprenda el mensaje. The independent clause is the me preocupa part, so that part is not in the subjunctive. That is in the indicative, which just means, for our purposes today, present tense. The que divides the sentence, and the comprenda is your second verb in the dependent clause, and it is in the subjunctive. For doubt, dudamos que haya un examen mañana. We doubt that there is an exam tomorrow. So the que divides the sentence, the dudamos is the verb in the indicative, and it's in the independent clause, and the haya is the subjunctive verb in the dependent clause. For denial, es imposible que Ignacio sepa patinar. So you have es imposible is your independent clause, the que divides the sentence, and the sepa in red is your verb in the subjunctive. For an imaginary antecedent or an imaginary person, as I mentioned before, busco un novio que me traiga flores cada semana. So you have your busco un novio as the independent clause, the que that divides the sentence, and the traiga is the verb in the dependent clause, and it is in the subjunctive. Here are some recordatorios, or reminders, about the subjunctive. It's very basic. There must be a change of subject from the first verb to the second verb. You can't say, I hope that I, and use the subjunctive. You do not do that. You don't say, they doubt that they, okay? You need to have a change of subject. The subjunctive verb is after the K, not before. You need to make sure that that first verb in the independent clause is not in the subjunctive. And you never attach a pronoun to the end of a verb in the subjunctive, even though it can look like a command. You know, subjunctive forms look an awful lot like their command counterparts, so there might be a temptation to go ahead and add a reflexive, indirect, or direct pronoun to the end of those verbs, but they are, in fact, conjugated verbs, not like commands, and you want to make sure that you treat them as such, and you put the pronouns in front of the conjugated verb. And hopefully that gives you a good explanation of the basic concept of the subjunctive.